That geographic proximity does not mean that countries' economies are necessarily linked. We believe that having a common currency, all that having a common currency means is that one country's sovereignty is infringed upon, and additionally the ability of monetary policy to exist in different states is infringed upon. We're very proud of those. So what are we talking about when we talk about common currency? The info slide is very clear, right? We think it's when multiple countries, generally countries who are geographically close to each other, share one currency across borders, right? Like the euro or the franc don't given. We think that's very clear. So, two arguments. First of all, how current common currencies affect fiscal policy, and second of all, how they decrease the strength of stronger economies within the region. So, first, how they affect fiscal policy. So, we think fiscal policy is very important for how states affect their own economies. Why is this the case? Because when states are either in inflationary or deflationary periods, there are different methods of fiscal policy that are used to like get the country out of fiscal periods, right? Either inflation or deflation. Right, like adding more currency or adding more cash to the economy or whatever. The problem with common currencies is that different economies are at different like instances at the same point in time, right? So one country could be in an inflationary cycle and another country could be in an deflationary cycle. And the problem with that is that those two things require two completely different solutions. But the problem with common currencies is that these two completely different solutions cannot occur at the same time. Because if you introduce a large amount of money into an inflationary cycle, then what you do is just increase inflation to a greater extent, even though you might be stopping deflation in different states, right? So we think it's impossible for effective monetary policy to ever efficiently occur when there's a common currency. We think this is specifically harmful because what happens is large economies largely dominate smaller economies, right? Like for example, in the euro, we think that Germany, if for example, Germany was in a deflationary cycle while Greece is in an inflationary cycle, it is more likely that Germany, because it has a larger economy, the ability to like wield larger influence in the EU, to have to prioritize its own economy over the economy of Greece, right? So we think that's also particularly harmful because countries who already have smaller economies already have economies that are more likely to fail, right? Are now at a greater disadvantage and less likely to have a successful economy in the future. So we think that is specifically harmful. Closing, you want a question now?
Okay, sure. On your side of the house, you don't just have to deal with the fact that Greece had an economic crisis. You have to deal with what Greece would look like if Germany hadn't bailed them out because they were both in the Eurozone.
Right, so we think that, okay, so that gets into the second point, right? But like, broadly dealing with it now, we think that like countries already have an incentive in a globalized economy to make sure other countries don't fail, right? So we think that incentive exists without common currencies, So, so what that means is that large countries largely have a dominant effect over the economies of smaller countries, which fundamentally erodes the sovereignty of these smaller countries, right? So we think that is also illegitimate, especially because it doesn't have a strong benefit that exists for the smaller countries. They didn't necessarily, accept this imposition into their economies, right? So we think also that is illegitimate and a reason that we think common currencies necessarily are harmful. The second point about how it just negatively impacts all of the economies, right? Because we think that dealing with the POI, we think that strong economies are invariably linked to smaller economies, right? Things we talk about like credit rating. When you have one currency, all the countries are evaluated similarly. When you talk about like credit ratings, the ability of countries to get loans, right? What this does, it creates a perverse incentive for countries to only prioritize the strength of the currency and like their investment and their standing as a country, as opposed to making sure that a smaller country who is in a financial crisis is in the best position possible, right? For example, the Greece-Germany example, right? Because now Germany is imposing severe austerity restrictions on the Greek economy, not because they think it's the best thing for the Greek economy, because they think it's the best thing for their own economy, because then Greece doesn't go into debt anymore, and now the euro as a whole is a stronger currency, which benefits the stronger economies that exist within the region. However, this is specifically harmful for Greece because austerity means that like they can't do things like support healthcare, right? Their social safety net becomes decreased, right? Their ability as a government to function is decreased. It also incentivizes domestic unrest within the state, right? So we think that once again, smaller economies, fundamentally, when we have common currencies, smaller economies will always be disadvantaged by larger economies. And once again, we think the incentive already exists within the status quo. We have countries when we have a globalized economy, when we have trade and exports and imports between countries, we have things like free trade agreements. There's already incentives for economies to become intertwined without common currencies, right? Because we think that opposition has to prove to us that the only way to get interconnected economies, the only way to get economies that can be successful in tandem with other countries is through common currencies, right? And we think that's been factually proven to not be the case, right? So we think that common currencies, all they do is create a situation where larger economies can dominate smaller countries, larger economies can dominate can dominate smaller economies, right, without the consent necessarily of the smaller economies, right? We think that also in a large majority of instances, smaller economies are forced into common currencies because they really have no ability to opt out of it, right? Because, for example, if all the countries within a region adopt the common currency, and then you are left out in the cold without the common currency, and there's other incentives to joining the common currency, right? Because we think the euro is a perfectly good example of this. Because joining the euro and having the common currency also means that you get things like free movement of labor between countries. You also get things like free trade between countries. So it's not just the case that common currency agreements only deal with common currencies, which is why smaller countries are always going to be forced into these common currency agreements, even if it doesn't necessarily benefit them in the long term, right? So we don't, once again, don't get enough regard to say, well, they agreed to this, so therefore it is okay, because we think in a large majority of instances, it is not a real choice that smaller countries are making because their economies are so much smaller when large groups decide to do one thing and there are adverse harms to not joining the economic group. It will always be harmful. So hopefully you have questions.
Yes. So considering that individuals always have to make choices based on pressures and economic pressures that necessarily coerce them, why is it necessarily bad in this particular instance?
We think it's bad in the majority of instances, but we're just talking about this one, right? So, okay. So finally about like why this isn't the only way that we can do this. I already touched about this. I touched on this earlier, but we think there's other ways to have economic integration, which is the like fundamental point of common currencies, right? So I already talked about like you have better immigration policies, you get more work visas, you get like free trade agreements, you get a free movement of labor between countries. We think these are things that can all exist without common currencies. Also, we don't think that common currencies necessarily equate to political cohesion within a geographic group, right? Because we think that is the case that once again there are always going to be other incentives outside of having a common currency for countries to work together, like other political or social or economic incentives. Because once again, common currencies are not the only way that countries are connected economically. Finally, connected economically. On our side of the house, we think that common currencies only exist as a way for larger economies to dominate smaller economies. They don't benefit smaller economies. That's the only way for global economic interconnectedness to occur. We are very proud to propose.
And thank the Prime Minister for that speech. And invite the leader of the opposition to take the floor.
Honorable Speaker, Khalil is correct about one thing, that certainly having a common form of currency isn't the only way we can achieve economic integration. But we on side opening opposition say that it is the best way and the best mechanism to have economic integration in a way that you wouldn't have if you didn't have a common currency. Recognize what the opening government has to defend is smaller and weak countries having to manufacture and create their own currency, where they have to suffer power asymmetry with exchange rates and have to literally inflate their currency to even give it some type of value, leading to all of those tangible negative benefits that debilitate those weaker states from ever being able to achieve economic sustainability. On the comparative, on our side of the house, we get economic sustainability specifically for weaker states in a way that they don't get on their side of the house. We fundamentally reject this notion of power asymmetry that Khalil literally doesn't substantiate at all, but merely asserts and wants you to believe it is to be true. 2 points coming from this speech. First, why are common currencies essential? Second, what are the benefits of this generally speaking? But first, a couple of pieces of rebuttal. So first, we get this idea from Khalil that it hurts fiscal policies unique to every country because you have this monolithic or myopic framework for how we deal with the unique circumstances of every country. Clearly, this isn't true. When you look at supranational authorities like the European Union that have the same monetary form of currency in the euro, they clearly have different methodologies for dealing with different issues in different countries based off the economic climates of those countries. So, for an example, they may have the European Union Impact and Stability Plan for like all the countries to abide by, but they still take a meticulous effort in making sure that each country's economic climate is sort of aligned with like what's actually happened with the policies that they're using. So just because they have the same European or same economic form of currency doesn't mean that the European Union itself will approach each and every country the exact same way. The only thing that the currency really does is strengthen the ties between them, so you have an easeability of transference of currency between the multiple countries. Then he says, well, instead, like when you have this prioritization of the strength of currency, you have Germany imposing strict austerity measures. Recognize that this is bad or wrong for two reasons. First of all, when Germany imposed the austerity measures, it was necessary at the time. So yes, you may get the fact that Greece does not have enough to support social welfare programs like they did before, but as you can see, for an example, Greece's debt rate has decreased exponentially over the past couple of years. These are things that have been proven. So the austerity measures and austerity programs were a necessary evil in this regard for Greece to be able to achieve economic sustainability in the way that they would on their side of the house. So if their economy is failing, then these countries are in a position where they have to have some assistance from countries that they don't get. But on their side of the house, they do prioritize the strength of the currency, because recognized countries will be less likely to engage economically with other countries that have a currency that doesn't align with the value of their own. So they prioritize strength of currency on their side of the house because they only will engage in trade with countries that have a currency that is palatable to theirs and has good value to theirs as well. No. So why are common currencies essential? We see that this tangibly binds countries together with a monetary union. Recognize that this was the rationale that the European Union used in 1996 when they implemented the Maastricht Treaty, because it's all about maximizing opportunities for economic coalescence in a way that you don't get without having a common currency. This is all part of larger efforts for economic integration because countries with similar regional economic interests converge. So Khalil says, well, geographic proximity isn't enough. That's partially true, but the benefit of having those types of regional forms of currency means that you're in regional proximity with other trade partners, other countries that might be a part of a larger regional economic coalition, for example, like you see in Africa. I forgot the name of it, that's really bad. Or like what you see in Europe right now with the European Union. Recognize that this is also important for it happens when it's the ability to help smaller countries, like I said, who don't have the economic capacity to manufacture and create their own currency. Recognize this is one of the problems with Venezuela, for example, the currency they have. They're dealing with massively high rates of inflation, which leads to increases of prices, decreasing the quality of life. That's the comparative that opening government and closing government has to defend, when weaker states themselves have to create their own currency and the mechanisms they use to create those currencies in the very first place. We say it provides a safety net that makes it much easier to get economic interdependence in two distinct ways. First, because the actions of states generally affects the currency of another. What this means is that now you have greater accountability, not only to the citizens within your state for your economic policy, but to your trade partners as well. What you have now is a safety net where other countries can make decisions that are rational, and supranational authorities like the EU can guide them to make rational decisions such that those countries can have better economic outputs because, like OG said, their economic ties are bound together. We also say, yeah, but I'll take closing.
So on this issue of accountability, by hypothesis, it seems like the Greek citizens would disagree that somehow their government actually was accountable to the people. Can you explain to us how on your side of the house you're actually tailoring policies to the interests of the Greeks?
I want to be very clear. The accountability is between Greece and its citizens, certainly, but Greece and also the neighboring countries around them. The Greek citizens themselves would not have liked the austerity measures, but it was a necessity at the time to stabilize the economy. And as I said earlier, the austerity measures have led to positive, tangible, incremental benefits for them. Like I said earlier when I talked about the decrease, for example, in their debt. But why are there so many benefits with having this common currency? Well, one, like I said, you have a safety net for these weaker and smaller states that otherwise do not have the capacity to have their own currency. So we think this is principally good because it makes it easier for them to be able to build infrastructure. It makes it easier for these other countries to sell arguments, for example, that we should help these other countries, we also think it leads to political integration. It leads to this idea that we're all a part of this greater collective community like the European Union, such that it is even seen in our having the same currency. And therefore, we should subsume the same political plights as other countries, even though they may be geographically distant from us. We think there's an ease of economic transparency where you don't have currency manipulation, for example, and you stop running from a zero-sum framework. Because now, with current common currency, you're forced to look at the economic plights of countries that are surrounding you, and you cannot become so deterministic and so self-aggrandizing that you don't have the incentive to care about those other countries. Honorable Speaker and panel, we live in a globalized world, and we think the best way to achieve economic interdependence and integration is by this policy. We're extremely proud to oppose.